Each week we're covering different kinds of material. But again, these are 3 books in our Bible that there's material that is not in our Bible. So just to reprise, Apocrypha contains a lot of different things. We have several weeks still to go, and we'll be covering more material in the next few weeks. So far, the 2 historical books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, remember they're very different. 1st Maccabees was kind of a straightforward history. 2nd Maccabees was more of a religious history. We had 2 wisdom books, Sirach, which was from Palestine, and then Solomon, which was over from Egypt. And then last week, we, of course, had the 2 short stories, Tobit and the Book of Judith. Tonight, we turn to the editions of these 3 books, as we've already mentioned. So Daniel. First, some sort of big picture stuff about Daniel. Daniel appears to have been written in response to the same crisis that produced 1st and 2nd Maccabees. This is the crisis of Antiochus Epiphanes or Antiochus IV, 167 BC. So we can actually date that real quick. Daniel as a book is unlike anything else in the Hebrew Bible. It contains 2 completely different kinds of material. It's almost like 2 books that have no relationship to each other, somehow or another got fused together. The first half of the book, literally, chapters 1 through 6, is a collection of what you might call hero stories, like the one Richard just did about Susanna. Kind of hero story is about, we have a Jewish hero, Daniel, who is sort of our representative as the Jewish faith. And it focuses on his faithfulness to God in spite of persecution for his faith. So clearly that fits within that Maccabean period. Second half of the book of Daniel, you probably know, is extremely different. It is an apocalypse. Bizarre images, symbolism. It's a lot like the book of Revelation. As a matter of fact, Daniel is the primary source of Revelation's imagery that it takes in the Old Testament. But again, this is the only pure apocalypse in the Old Testament. There are 5 additions to the book of Daniel. We have 2 prayers, and they're put together. We have 3 stories about Daniel that are added at the end, 2 additional chapters. The additions to Daniel that were in the Greek Septuagint are similar to the material that's in the first half of Daniel. So this extra material is not apocalyptic. It's more prayers and then some more hero stories. They show that not all the stories of Daniel made it into the Hebrew Bible. We're actually going to see another example even from the Dead Sea Scrolls. 5 additions, 2 prayers, 3 short stories. The 2 prayers are together, and they're inserted in our Bible. It would be between Daniel 3:23 and 3:24. And these are basically kind of liturgical elements. You remember the youth in the fiery furnace? Well, the prayer of Azariah, which is kind of a prayer confession. And then we have the song of the three Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if you remember that when you were from your probably being a child in Sunday school. So both of these prayers are associated with those 3 youth in the fiery furnace that go with that. And they sort of make it more of a religious type thing. The 3 stories we got are Susanna, that Richard went over, Belle, and then we have a dragon. These make up 2 additional chapters. Essentially, Susanna is a chapter 13, and the others are in chapter 14. Richard's already covered this, but we're going to cover it because we got other people who are just watching these or just using the PowerPoints. Sometimes called the first detective story. Richard likes to refer to it as kind of a trial narrative. You know the story now. Wife of Joachim, beautiful, chaste. By the way, this description, beautiful and chaste, seems to be a running theme of the literature of this period. All the Jewish women are beautiful. All the Jewish women are chaste. And by the way, don't mess with them. It never ends well. 2 Jewish elders, appointed judges, lust. And by the way, the issue of lust is more a theme of the Greek period. So again, this kind of dates this. Again, they spied on her bathing, and that got things going. The judges tell her she must submit to them sexually. She faces charges of adultery. She refuses. They accuse her of adultery. In court, her accusers are believed because they're judges. She is sentenced to death for adultery, assumed to be stoned. Susanna then cries out to God in vindication. Richard mentioned that in all these stories, we have that kind of a theme. God hears, just like God heard the cry of the Israelites in Egypt, and in all these stories, through the Spirit, God moves Daniel, the young man, to intervene. And again, he sort of acts like a detective, or one of the weird things that's happening right now is that the old series Perry Mason has come back, but it's very, very different. But it's kind of a Perry Mason kind of moment. You've got a trial lawyer who really knows what he's doing, and he's going to catch the inconsistencies here. Which tree is it? Richard covered that with you. Susanna is spared. The wicked judges are executed. Daniel's reputation is increased. Happy ending, all is well. Story of Belle and the dragon. Actually, two stories. Similar to the stories found in Daniel 1 through 6. These are hero stories about Daniel, and particularly organized around how foolish it is to worship idols. And so both of these stories ridicule the folly of idolatry. So the story of Belle. Belle is a great statue or an idol who is said to be real and who lives. Well, how do we know that Belle is real or lives? Well, because Belle eats the offerings that are presented to her. The priest put offerings out, they go back home, everybody comes back in the morning, and voila, the offerings have been eaten. Belle lives, Belle is real. Daniel knows better. So he discredits Belle and its priests by showing that the idol's eating of the offering is in fact faked. It's a sham. Daniel secretly spreads ashes, the statue, at night after everybody has left. The priests leave footprints in the ashes when they sneak in through a secret entrance. You can see this from where the footprints come and where the footprints go. Now we know where the entrance is. To eat the food the king has given to his God. Story of Daniel, of the dragon. Again, another story sort of ridiculing idolatry. Daniel refuses to worship the snake, dragon, as a god. Daniel then wittily kills the dragon by feeding it a concoction of fat, pitch, and hair. That sounds like I would kill anything. Again, showing up the foolishness of idolatry. Now, the three stories together, Susanna, Belle, and the dragon, are added at the end of Daniel, and in the version of Daniel that has these, it changes the way the book ends. The book no longer ends with the glorious vindication of God's people and the promise of resurrection, which is our Daniel, chapter 12, that's where it ends. Instead, if you add the two chapters, it focuses on coping with the realities of life in a Gentile-dominated and idol-riddled culture. So adding the two really does change the focus of the book. Now, I thought you might like this. There are even more stories of Daniel that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Daniel stories are a little cottage industry. You may know the nomenclature here, but 4Q243-45. Q means Qumran. 4 is K4. That's where all the fragments are found. So we have fragments here. And 3 of them, number 243, 244, 245, are stories of Daniel. And so this is also called, sometimes it's just given this reference, it's also called Pseudo-Daniel. You can actually Google this if you'd like to read more. Now, what Pseudo-Daniel is a series of apocalyptic visions like those found in Daniel 7 through 12. So the additions in the Apocrypha are like the first half of Daniel. This edition is like the second half of Daniel. That's interesting. Now, in this edition, Daniel stands before the king Belshazzar, and then he narrates and gives a long apocalyptic version of Israel's history. And the four kingdoms, here the four kingdoms which are in the regular book of Daniel, reoccur, but they're described as different kinds of trees. And so it goes back to the beginning, narrates the history. What's interesting as the history rolls forward, it has the Greeks and the Romans which kind of tells you that this is probably written very late, maybe even 1st century AD. Fragment 1, column 1, has this little bit I'm going to lift up for you. The brilliant light arose, and the 4 trees after him. 4 trees, A tree arose, and the others moved away from it. He, the angel, we have angels here, said to me, "What kind of tree is it?" I replied, "If only I could see and understand it." Typical of apocalyptic. Then I saw a balsam tree. I asked it. By the way, the ... dots are where the text is somewhat broken and fragmentary. The manuscript was partially damaged. "What is your name?" It replied, "Babylon." So the second tree is Babylon. The first tree, of course, would have been Assyria. Then I said to it, "You are he who shall rule over Persia." Then I saw another tree that was below where we were standing, and it swore, and it breaks up, and claimed to be different, superior to the previous tree. We have some damage to the text here. So I asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, looking at it, it looks like what we've got is the third one would have been Persia. The fourth one would have been Greece. I said to him, "You are he who shall rule over by the power he swore." And I saw the third tree again. So the history of Israel, we see this in many documents, told symbolically like an apocalyptic. Now, for us as Christians, one of the interesting things about a pseudo-Daniel is it contains a messianic figure who is called the Son of God. And of course, in Christian tradition, we believe that Jesus is the Messiah and the title Son of God. So this is not a Christian version. This is a Jewish version found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Here's what it says. "He will be called the Son of God. They will call him Son of the Most High. His kingdom will be an eternal kingdom, and he will be righteous in all his ways. He will judge the earth in righteousness, and everyone will make peace. The sword shall cease from the earth," kind of like an Isaiah passage, "and every nation will bow down to him. As for the great God, with his help he will make war, and he will give all the people into his power, into the Son of God's power. All of them he will throw down before the Son of God. His rule will be an eternal rule." Book of Esther. I'm going to tell the story of Esther because otherwise the editions don't make any sense. But here's the short version. Esther is another story of conflict between faith and the values of the Gentile world, the faith and values of the Jews. So we got conflict here. In the story, Esther and her uncle Mordecai are pious Jews living among the Gentiles in the Persian kingdom. Also, as you tell the story, it's clearly that we're in the Greek period. The Persian queen Vashti falls out of favor by disobeying the king. She is uppity, and she is not going to do what the king told her to do, which is not job security. And the search is now on for a new queen. Esther the Jew finds favor with the queen because of her beauty, and then she becomes queen. And by the way, it's a little spicy in their little bedroom scene that I'm going to skip over for the moment. Esther's uncle Mordecai works in the court of the king, saves the king from assassination, and the conspirators are put to death. So this is a good thing. Enter the villain, boo, hiss, Haman, second only in power to the king. All are ordered, Haman orders them, to bow down to him. He's sort of full of himself. Mordecai, being a good Jew, refuses to bow. He will bow only to God. This results in Haman deciding to destroy not only Mordecai, but all of his people, the Jews. It's going to be a genocide. We're going to eradicate the Jews. A date is set for their destruction. This is done by casting of lots, which is the key word in this book. The Hebrew word for lots is Purim, and you probably know that one of the Hebrew festivals today is Purim. It is based on the book of Esther. Mordecai learns what is planned. He repents in sackcloth and ashes, although he's done nothing wrong, but this is apparently how you get God's attention. He persuades Esther to intercede on behalf of her people. She then gives a theological statement, and she's going to go into the king's presence without being invited, which is traditionally a death sentence. Esther acts. She risks death by entering the throne room unannounced. He becomes angry. She faints. Very effective ploy. Esther then sets up 2 nights of dinners with the king and Haman. Of course, the king forgave her. Meanwhile, Haman is further enraged at seeing Mordecai. So Haman decides to build gallows and to have Mordecai killed on the gallows the next day. And this is one of those great themes we see in this literature. You know that when he does this, you know how Mordecai is going to die. The king remembers how Mordecai saved his life. The king asks Haman how to honor someone special. Irony of ironies, he does not mention that Mordecai is the person he wants to honor. So Haman, of course, thinks the king wants to reward him, so his response is over the top lavish. This is what you should do for that kind of person. Then the king tells Haman to give this reward to the Jew Mordecai. At the banquet honoring Mordecai, Esther reveals that Haman has sought to destroy Mordecai and the Jews, including herself, the queen. The king is enraged. He sentences Haman to death. Esther then asks that the edict of Haman be rescinded to kill all the Jews, and that the Jewish people should be allowed to defend themselves from their enemies. The decree is issued. When the attack comes, the Jews are prepared. They defend themselves. Their enemies, of course, are vanquished. Mordecai, Esther inherit everything that was Haman's, which is a lot. Many convert to the Jewish faith. By the way, this is something you only see in the Greek period, this idea of becoming proselytes. As the queen, Esther then commands that the new holiday of Purim be celebrated everywhere and forever. And it still is. Because God made 2 lots, Purim, 1 lot for the people of God and 1 lot for the nations. And with that, the book comes to an end. Now, here's what's really interesting. The version that's in our Bibles does not even mention God or any religious theme. It is totally secular. When the Jews made a decision to exclude anything that was written in Greek or anything in Aramaic and to keep the stuff that was Hebrew, it turns out that the book of Esther was mostly in Hebrew, but had some things in Aramaic and Greek. Therefore, actually there was an Aramaic. They were excluded, which leaves a very kind of funky version in their Bible. You may already know this, but the book that the Jews argued the most about as to whether or not it should be in the Bible was the book of Esther. It's the last book to be accepted, and you can see why. What did it have going for it? Well, Purim is a Jewish holiday, and this story gives the background to it. Now, version in the Apocrypha has 6 editions totaling 107 verses, doubling the length of the book. So there's a lot of material here. These are full of religious content. Essentially, these are all additions to the story to take a secular story and to make it religious. The material includes prayers, doxologies, references to God, references to God's will, references to God's action, references to God's law, and of course, Jewish religious observances. So this material is now woven in, changing the book of Esther substantially. The additions show the piety of the Jews and how God delivers them from difficult situations. And this is Deuteronomic theology. If you obey the Lord your God, it will go well for you. Even if you're controlled by Gentiles, God will still deliver you. You put them all together, and what we really get is a window into the religious beliefs of Judaism of this period, which is probably in the Greek period, could be before or after Maccabees, but sometime in that period. Now, the editions are just by scholarly tradition called A, B, C, D, E, F, and real creative there, guys, but 6. Editions A and F are the opening and the closing of the book. So this is sort of brackets the book. These brackets emphasize God's providential care for the Jews in a universally hostile Gentile world. So the book and the Apocryphal version, this is the theme of the book. God will take care of you, even against the hostile Gentile world. Edition A, the opening, also has a dream of two dragons amidst apocalyptic images. It's like a little apocalypse kind of stuck in there, like Revelation. The vision tells Mordecai what God will do in the future, just like in Daniel, just like in Revelation. Editions B and E, kind of coming in, not the two on the outside, but in, give the text of the decrees. The book of Esther just mentions that decrees are given. Here we actually have the decrees printed in their wording. And E repeatedly mentions God and God's providence. God's providence, huge theme in Esther, at least the Apocryphal version. Edition C has two prayers, one by Mordecai and one by Esther. The prayer by Mordecai acknowledges that God is the supreme ruler of the universe, Jewish Theology 101, and asks God to deliver Israel. It mixes God's sovereignty over the nations with God's unique relationship to Israel. So kind of get an insight into Jewish thinking right before the time of Jesus. Esther's prayer also acknowledges God's election of Israel. Now, her prayer also frames the coming conflict in terms of a conflict between the one true God of Israel and other gods. So this is not just a conflict between Haman and Mordecai and her. It's not a conflict just between the Jewish people and the Gentiles. It is a conflict between the God of Israel and the other gods. So this is picking up that same theme that we saw in Daniel, the kind of the idolatry theme. Same thing in Daniel, same thing in Judith. Esther then asked God to deliver Israel, just like Mordecai did. She asked God also to keep her clean, pure, or in this case, kosher, as she presents herself to the king. Edition C, kind of in the middle, emphasizes the queen's super Jewishness. She abhors being married to a Gentile, as well as her strict adherence to kosher Jewish dietary laws. So here she's presented as an archetypal Jew of this period. She's clinging to her heritage, her distinctiveness as a Jew, and putting some distance between her and the Gentile or the Greek culture. Edition D is an enhanced version of Esther's sudden entry into the king's throne room. The one in the main book of Esther is just quick and abrupt. Here we add a key feature. It is God who miraculously changes the king's fierce anger to gentleness and allows her to live. In this scene, it is God, not Esther, who saves the day by turning the king's heart from anger to softness and concern for his wife. Edition E provides the text of the new edict that saves the Jews. This decree has multiple references to God as the one driving the action. Edition F, Mordecai interprets the two kinds of lots. The lots cast by Haman to determine when the Jews would be destroyed, and the lots are the fates or the destinies appointed by God. These, of course, are contrasted with each other. With the additions, the meaning of Purim has changed. Purim is no longer interpreted only in terms of deliverance, but in terms of separation of Jew and Gentile, and that this is part of the plan of God. So the additions, just like Daniel, what you do with these additions is you take an existing text and you reframe it, you reinterpret it to change its message. Book of Psalms. Book of Psalms, collection of 150 songs written over a long period of time, hundreds and hundreds of years, lots of different authors. In the book, as we have it, it's organized. It's been edited into a very produced version. It's organized into 5 books, just like the Torah. Each book ends with a doxology in the section. So we have material, doxology, material, doxology. Psalms 1 and 2 serve as an introduction to the book as a whole, introducing 2 of the great themes of Psalms. And of course, Psalm 150 is a conclusion to the book as a whole. So the Psalms have been organized into this sort of collection. We know of 5 additional Psalms that existed, and they did not make it into the book of Psalms. These are numbered 151. By the way, 151 is the only one that's actually in a Bible. It's in the Orthodox Bible. 52, 53, 54, and 55 were discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Collectively, they're known as the Apocryphal Psalms of David. One in the Orthodox Bible. Interestingly, 151 is also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's found as 2 Psalms, designated 151a and 151b. The scholars are so creative. So here's 151. This is in the Orthodox Bible as scripture. This is a Psalm of David. It's not, but it's supposedly. I was small among my brothers and the youngest of my father's son. I was shepherd of my father's sheep. My hands made a musical instrument. My fingers strung a lap harp. Who will tell my Lord? The Lord himself, the Lord hears me. The Lord himself sent his messenger and took me away from my father's sheep. He put special oil on my forehead to anoint me. My brothers were good looking and tall, but the Lord didn't take special pleasure in them. I went out to meet the Philistine, who cursed me by his idols. Again, this idolatry theme in these later writings. But I took his own sword out of its sheath and cut off his head. So I removed the shame from the Israelites. Now, there's nothing new in that psalm. It's material that we already have in all the psalms, but it's actually a quite beautiful psalm, and it's a wonderful summary of David's, before he became king. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and some Syriac material, we have 4 additional psalms. They've been numbered 52 through 55. I don't think I'm going to read all these word for word because I'm going to be sending out to you the PowerPoint here in a little bit. But Psalm 152, we probably will do it. This is ostensibly a prayer of Hezekiah. In the book of Psalms, Hezekiah is the author of several of the Psalms. They're attributed to him. So Hezekiah has got his King Hezekiah. This is the king at the time of Isaiah. His enemies have surrounded him. This is when Isaiah was coming to him, and here's his prayer. Glorify God with a loud voice. Proclaim his glory in the assembly of many. Among the multitude of the upright, glorify his praise. And speak of his glory with the righteous. Join yourselves to the good and to the perfect, to glorify the Most High. Gather yourselves together to make his strength known. And do not be slow in showing his deliverance and his glory to all the children. That the honor of the Lord may be known. Wisdom has been given, and to tell of his works it has been made known to all. To make his strength made known to children, and to make them that lack understanding comprehend his glory. Who are far more from his wonders and distant from his gates, because the Lord of Jacob is exalted, and his glory is on all his works. And if a man who glorifies the Most High, he will take pleasure, as in one who offers fine meal, but as in one who offers male goats and calves, and as in one who glorifies the altar with the multitude of burnt offerings, and as the smell of incense from the hands of the just. From your upright gates his voice will be heard, and from the voice of the upright reproof. And in their eating will be satisfying in truth, and in their drinking they will share together. Their dwelling is in the law of the Most High, and their speech is to make his strength known. How far from the wicked is speech in him, and from his transgressions to know him. The eye of the Lord takes pity on the good, and he will multiply mercy on them that glorify them. And from the time of evil he will deliver their soul. Blessed is the Lord, who has delivered the wretched from the hand of the wicked, who raises up a horn out of Jacob, and a judge of the nations out of Israel, that he may prolong his dwelling in Zion, and may adorn our age in Jerusalem. Now, a couple of observations here. One is, it's wordy. And these other Psalms are all like that. They're very wordy. They don't have the simplicity and the cleanness that you see in the Psalms that we have in our Bible mostly. They also seem to reflect that we know now from the Qumran community, eating together and drinking together. A lot of these references probably are references to the Qumran community, the Essenes there, and how they lived and how they worshiped. So very fitting for that. So we're not going to go over it, but you've got Psalm 153, 154, and 155. Again, long, wordy, but again, they give you kind of insights into what's going on. But you'll get that PowerPoint shortly.